So I want to talk about the destabilization efforts of the U.S. government against Venezuela. I am an American citizen, and I find these war games to be absolutely horrendous, absolute bullshit. So recently, there was 25,000 tons or 25 tons of soy foods and products were seized in the Panama Canal that was going to Venezuela. So Panama, because of the U.S. government, stopped, because of the sanctions and the crisis, they stopped the food from going into Venezuela. They stopped the food. Yeah, we care so much about the Venezuelan people. We care so much that they're starving. We stopped food from going into Venezuela. We're stopping food. We're stopping medicine. We're stopping any and all goods from getting into Venezuela. We got a military blockade. We got an embargo. So because of the executive order that was issued earlier this month, just 13 days ago, you had this, 25 tons of soy foods that was held up in the Panama Canal. And then you also have Russia, who had signed a deal with Venezuela to essentially protect them, and they sent a naval vessel. So they sent a naval vessel to Venezuela after the unacceptable U.S. moves. And to be honest with you, I approve of Russia supporting Venezuela because Americans apparently, are no longer anti-war, or better yet, the anti-war folks can't stop any of these 27 forever wars that we're currently engaged in right now. We're only engaged in 27 forever wars. Why not go ahead and engage in another forever war? So that's how you can tell who the bad guys are. All you got to do is just look at who is stopping the food and medicine and humanitarian aid from going into Venezuela. Those are the bad guys. So yeah, we care so much about their people. They're starving. They're hungry. Their government is so oppressive. Yeah, that's the reason, right? Okay, then how come we're stopping food and medicine and humanitarian aid from getting into Venezuela? So it's very obvious. What is going on in Venezuela is very obvious for anybody who is paying attention to see what's actually going on, what's actually happening. So in the very beginning, right before this Venezuela crisis had begun earlier this year, 2019, the U.S. government had met with the CEOs of all the major oil companies in the United States. So on the eve, of the Cold War against Venezuela, when, we announced Guaido to be president, even though he never ran for president and has never received one single vote from a Venezuelan citizen for president, the U.S. government had met with the CEOs of all the major oil companies. So the oil companies were all gathered together. They're being very obvious. The oil companies, Venezuela is like, the top third or something in oil reserves. So out of all the nations in the entire world, they're in the top 10. And I think they're third. So the oil, and they're socialist. That's the reason we are fucking with Venezuela. They have a lot of resources, some oil, and I'm going to just take the oil. That's how we're going to pay for the wars. That's been his policies. Take the oil. And then also, I can't stand socialism, even though we've had a half-capitalistic, half-socialistic system for the last 70 years. So all the oil companies had gathered together on the eve to basically discuss how they're going to divvy up, Venezuela, just like in The Godfather when they were divvying up Cuba. The U.S. government has taken 3 oil refineries that were owned by Venezuela along the Gulf of Mexico, so I guess because they're on our soil, therefore we get to take their property. Now we're stealing stuff, so we don't believe in free trade, we don't believe in fairness, and we don't believe that the Venezuelan people do not pose any threat. The country of Venezuela doesn't pose any threat whatsoever to the United States. Not now. They could, because of all these, bullshit war games. We've given a pretense to let Russia put their, naval vessel in here. So the U.S. government stole 3 oil refineries. The Bank of England, the United Kingdom, has taken $1 billion worth of gold of Venezuela's. So this is outright theft, outright stealing. Twice, the electric grid in Venezuela has been shut down. But ultimately, really, what are we doing, right? What are we doing here? So we got all these sanctions, too, by executive order. But when it comes to the food, we're going to, give food for the Venezuelan people. But if we actually cared about the Venezuela, remember when we were going to give them a Trojan horse? We were giving them some humanitarian aid because we were saying we cared so much about the Venezuelan people that we were going to give them free food. And then it turned out that, you know, all this food had all these tracking devices and crap in it. So we offered humanitarian aid, right? We offered the Venezuelan people some food, and they rejected it. Oh, my God, how dare they? Yeah, it was a Trojan horse. It was a poison pill. So we don't give a damn about the Venezuelan people. This has nothing to do about the safety or the, you know, the sovereignty. It has nothing to do with... It has nothing to do with saving America. It has nothing to do with the nation of America. It has nothing to do with saving this country, making this country better. It has nothing to do with that. All it has to do with is stealing their damn oil, and because they're a socialist country, they're setting a bad example for the entire world. So we've had a bunch of sanctions. Obama had sanctions, but Donald Trump put these major sanctions on Venezuela in 2017, 2019. And since we've put those sanctions on Venezuela, we've killed 40,000 Venezuelan people in the past 2 to 3 years. So we're responsible already for 40,000 Venezuelans, the deaths of Venezuelans. So by executive order, this is how Donald killed the Dreamers program, by executive order, because he's a dictator, right? He can't get Congress to pay. He don't want Congress. He don't respect Congress. He's going to push to reinstate the federal death penalty. So he's a dictator who is antsy to kill his own people. So he's intensifying the Cold War on Venezuela. There's a full-on embargo, including an international blockade, at least amongst our allies. Then he's threatened sanctions on governments who trade with Venezuela. The NSA, the National Security Advisor, John Bolton, said that countries of the world now have to choose which side are you on. So you're either, you know, essentially the whole world, right? They're declaring war on the entire world. If you're not on our side, then... So we're being told, this is their information, the U.S. sanctions has cost Venezuela $17 billion per year. There's been a major decline in oil production in Venezuela with the imposition of U.S. sanctions in 2017-2019. John Bolton said it worked in Panama, and then in Nicaragua it worked one time. So will it work in Venezuela? Right? So they're using these tactics apparently against North Korea and Iran and Syria too. So the whole point of the sanctions and the blockade and the attacks on Venezuela's electric grid, the reason why we have a military build up in the ocean around Venezuela is to destabilize Venezuela. It's to hurt as many of the Venezuelan people as possible in order to topple the Maduro government. So it's war measures. It's Cold War measures. War measures. It's not a direct missile attack. It's not boots on the ground invasion, but it's getting very, very close to that. Very close to that. Nicaragua is the Sandinistas. You had a terror war in the 1980s until the people voted out the Sandinista government. So the U.S. government is going to blockade, put the pressure on, rip up its social and economic fabric of that country's society, make the people suffer as much as they, as possible, until the country plunges into chaos, and then you can impose your own choice of government onto that country. So in the 1980s, there was the Sandinistas, and then eventually the people, got sick of all the bullshit, and then they voted the Sandinista government out. So victory, right? Victory! Oh, but then, Nicaragua, you have all those, migrants, so I guess it didn't really help them out. I want to make a quick comment about the democracy in Venezuela. So Maduro was elected president by the majority of the Venezuelan people twice. Donald Trump wasn't elected once, not by the majority of the people, or plurality. He didn't beat the other guy. Right? Donald had 3 million votes less than Hillary. Hillary had 3 million votes more. So there's two elections. In the 2013 Venezuela presidential election, April 14th, 2013, Hugo Chavez had died March 5th, 2013, so this election was audited, so there was a recount. Maduro beat Henrique Capriles 51% to 49%, 7.6 million to 7.4 million, 15 plus capital district to 8 states. So basically, even though it was by the skin of his chinny chin, he won more states, right? He won 18 states, but it was 51% to 49%. So he did get the majority. He got 7.6 million of the Venezuelan people to vote for Maduro, Nicolas Maduro. So Nicolas Maduro was elected in 2013. He's elected president by 51% of the vote. Then you're going to have the 2018 Venezuela presidential election. So 2018, 5 years. Their presidential terms are 5 or 6 year terms. So the 2018 Venezuelan presidential election had a 46% turnout rate. Nicolas Maduro got 6.2 million votes, which is, substantially less than what he had got 5 years earlier. But there are other candidates. He got 68% of the vote. Henry Falcone got 1.9 million, which is 21% of the vote. And then Javier Bertucci got 1 million votes, which was 11%. So 68%, 21%, 11%. Maduro got the majority in that election too, 68%. He basically trounced the competition. So he won the majority twice in his election, whereas Donald Trump hasn't won one election where he's actually won the majority of his people. So Juan Guaido, he, on the other hand, this is going to be the puppet that the U.S. government is going to pick and back and say this is the, so-called legitimate government. Did this shit in Vietnam, too. Juan Guaido is elected a congressman and nothing else. Amongst the congressmen, he was elected president of the Senate or whatever the Congress is called. But he barely won his congressional seat. So he's never ran for president. He's never got a single vote for him to be president of the Venezuelan people. He's just assuming presidential power. He's just assuming it. He just raised his hand, Donald picked him, and now he's the president. The Venezuelan Constitution doesn't allow for Juan Guaido to take power the way that he has done. So saying Juan Guaido is the rightful president is like saying that Nancy Pelosi is the rightful president of America. So if the Venezuelan government wanted to impose their will, then they could just say, well, Nancy Pelosi is the actual president of America, and say that Donald Trump's government is illegitimate. He wasn't elected by the majority of his people. Jimmy Carter had said that Venezuela's elections is the best in the world. There's something about the Constituent Assembly versus the Congress. So Juan Guaido is part of a body that's mostly white, and then the Constituent Assembly is mostly dark and black. So there's a racial element to it. The Congress, Juan Guaido also comes from the elite. He's also wealthy. And the Constituent Assembly is made up of the working class people. The Constituent Assembly is there to rewrite a constitution. So that constitutional election should happen soon. That needs to happen first before this presidential election. They need a working constitution so they know how to proceed. But since they haven't come up with a brand new constitution, then the old constitution is in effect. But the Constituent Assembly is mostly poor, working class, brown and black people, and the Venezuelan Congress, whatever the body that Juan Guaido is a part of, they're mostly the upper elite, the wealthy, the moneyed and powerful classes. So Donald Trump lost by 3 million votes, but, democracy, schmonocracy. He has used 120 executive orders so far, so that's a dictator. That's a dictator. You went ahead and said 120 times, this is the law of America. I don't give a damn what anybody else thinks. He said that Obama was using executive orders, and he was so appalled by it, and now he's doing it. He's just the biggest hypocrite in the world. So there was one in August 5th, so there was an executive order on August 5th, 2019 that says that the U.S. could take anything it wanted away from Venezuela, and it's totally okay. So the Venezuelan government, any of their assets, any of their property, they said that they can block, everybody from engaging with them, so no Americans can do any business with them. So if you were planning on opening up a business, some kind of with Venezuela, you can't do it. You're not allowed to deal with Venezuela. So that restricts our freedom, that restricts trade. I thought these Republicans were for free trade, laissez-faire capitalism. This isn't capitalism. This isn't free trade. In the executive order, they had referenced IEEPA, the National Emergencies Act, Section 212F of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. Was that Truman? Section 301 of Title III. Now, Barack Obama, he had 276 executive orders, so, Donald has had less, but it's still 120 times. 120 executive orders, so the most popular executive order in American history would be the Emancipation Proclamation. So the Emancipation Proclamation was where Lincoln just, by decree, by the power of the presidency, said that the slaves in the rebellion states, the states that was not even in the Union anymore, they were free. So, yeah, wonderful. But anyways, that's an executive order. So you're telling me we've had 120 Emancipation proclamations, we have had 120. No, we haven't had 120 emancipation proclamations. Baby Bush had 291 executive orders, so Baby Bush had more executive orders than Barack Obama. He had 276. Bill Clinton had more than Baby Bush with 364. Papa Bush had 166. Ronald Reagan had 381. And Jimmy Carter had 320. And so, in a way, you know, Donald has been less than all those presidents so far, but he's only been in there for 2 years, so give him another 2 years. He'll have, you know, 200, 300, 400. I'm sure he'll beat, you know, Jimmy Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton. They all use these executive orders. But the thing about the executive orders is they are overturned in the first 100 days of the next presidency. So once the Democrats gain power, because it always goes back and forth, then the Democrats undo the Republicans undo the Democrats, and so all these executive orders get overturned by presidential decree. So far, Donald Trump has weakened the Endangered Species Act. He's allowed the Keystone Pipeline. He's passed NAFTA 2.0, and he killed DACA, the Dreamer program, by executive order. There is Executive Order 13808, July 27, 2017. This prohibited the Venezuelan government from accessing U.S. financial markets, allowing for exceptions to minimize the impact on the Venezuelan people and U.S. economic interest, restricts to U.S. debt and equity markets for the PDVSA, which is the state-owned oil company of Venezuela. The Executive Order 13850, on November 1st, 2018, it blocks the assets of anyone involved in the corruption in the gold sector or any other section of the economy as determined by, in the future, by the Secretary of the Treasury, which they later on said that it meant oil. Oh, okay, so oil. There is Executive Order 13827 prohibits the use of Venezuelan government using digital currency. EO 13835 prohibits the purchase of Venezuelan debt. So all these sanctions, all these are by executive order, this 2017, 2018, 2019, and then August 5th is the big one. So this is going to change. This is going to put the blockade into effect. A military blockade with our, naval vessels around Venezuela. So Donald, signs an executive order like the dictator that he is, since he's an unaccountable dictator, to inflict economic terrorism upon the Venezuelan people for basically warlike destabilization campaign. So they just want to, so August 2019 is when he's going to ban all Americans. So that's everybody in America is banned from doing business with Venezuela, and your assets will be frozen if you do. So this is stopping, capitalism. This is stopping, not really socialism. I think that the Venezuelan government and Maduro, so far he's been holding on, right? He's been hanging on tight. And so this is only making him look like an absolute hero. This is making him look like a god. So you wanted to destroy socialism, and yet you just made, this guy so I think you're actually doing socialism a favor. If capitalism works so well, how come you have to impose your will upon socialist countries in order to make them capitalist? I thought we believed in freedom. Don't we believe in freedom, America? So it's clearly an embargo, but Mike Pence is going to lie because he's a liar. He says it's not an embargo, it's total economic embargo. Or he said it's not an embargo, but it's a total economic embargo. No Americans, no citizen, no corporation, any America, and then also other nations can't deal with Venezuela, or else we'll put sanctions on them too. So it's a total economic embargo of Venezuela. This is a different U.S. foreign policy than the last 30 years. This is a new direction for the United States foreign policy. Nicolas Maduro said he renews his economic and political, he says that Donald is renewing the economic and political terrorism. This is a brand new phase. This is the new phase for the U.S. government. Venezuela's ambassador to the United Nations called the August 2019 executive order illegal, cruel, monstrous measures. John Bolton said it worked in Panama and it worked in Nicaragua once. Now, Obama had some sanctions against Venezuela, but just because, somebody else, if he jumped off a bridge, should Donald do it too? In 2002, there was one time under Baby Bush that the United States had tried to assassinate Hugo Chavez. Maduro had actually claimed that there was an attempt on his life too recently. So this 2002 is heavily documented. and it was, just about damn near toppled the U.S. government. Many Chavistas wondered if the U.S. had actually produced a biological weapon to spread cancer to their enemies, including Hugo Chavez, and that's what Hugo Chavez is going to die of, cancer. Stokely Carmichael wonders the same thing. He's going to die of cancer in Africa. Hugo Chavez donated heating oil for poor folks in the United States when he was the president of Venezuela. In 2017, Citgo, the Venezuelan-owned gas station, had gave $500,000 towards Donald's inauguration. $500,000. So, my God, their gas station had paid Donald $500,000, but, he's not a loyal. So, April 20th, 2017, Venezuela took over a General Motors plant in Venezuela, which caused the plant to close down. All the U.S. diplomats in the U.S. Embassy in Venezuela are totally gone. And Donald doesn't rule out military options, right? So all options are still on the table. So, we might nuke Venezuela. Who knows? He's been itching to push that button. He's unhinged now. If a U.S. invasion of Venezuela happens, Maduro's son has said that will lead to war. You invade our country, we have a right to defend ourselves, and the rifles will arrive in New York, and then we will take down your White House, or we will take your White House. So that's Maduro's son saying that if we invade Venezuela, they're going to send guns to New York, and then they're going to take Washington, D.C., just like the British did in the War of 1812. So millions of Venezuelans have signed a petition telling the U.S. not to invade. Millions of Venezuelans do not want the United States to meddle in their, not just their elections, but their entire government. The blockade on Venezuela, the military buildup around Venezuela, the embargo, the sanctioning of Guaido as the rightful president, shutting down their electric grid twice. These are all war games. These are actions of war games. The U.S. has never had to worry about Venezuela being any kind of threat. We've never had to worry about terrorists coming up from Venezuela. But if a war begins, they're saying it's not going to be the terrorists that we're going to be worried about. It's going to be soldiers from Venezuela. It's going to be soldiers from Russia and China. We've already given them a pretense to put a naval vessel in the Western Hemisphere. The whole point of the Monroe Doctrine is that we keep the colonial powers out. But now we're going to be the colonial power. So Donald's actions in Venezuela has already given them a pretense to put one of their naval ships into the Western Hemisphere. So if there's a war, then that will invite, war. It won't just invite, their military buildup, but it'll invite an all-out war. It'll invite Russia and China and North Korea, all of our enemies, into the Western Hemisphere for an all-out war. Dwight D. Eisenhower did a blockade against Guatemala in 1954 so the CIA could overthrow their head of government. And it worked. Our coup d'etat in 1954 worked because of the blockade against Guatemala. Blockades and embargoes are meant to hurt the Venezuelan people as much as possible, to stop the trade so their nation doesn't make money. They starve, and there's crime, and everybody's pissed off. And then, there's chaos. Then Maduro is toppled. But he doesn't pose any threat to the United States. The only reason that the U.S. government is involved in fucking up Venezuela is because Maduro is a socialist and because Venezuela is sitting on a shit ton of oil. Don has appointed 2 Supreme Court justices. His rate of appointments outpaces that of previous presidents when it comes to appointing judges all across the board. He's done enough damage. We can impeach this motherfucker over these bullshit Venezuelan war games. Congress has not voted to go to war with Venezuela. And then the kids on the border have died, and then, all the kids who died in Yemen. On Venezuela, Mike Gravel said that socialist countries in which the U.S. tries to assassinate their presidents aren't succeeding, right? Oh, yeah, it must be easy to say that. You try to, topple the government. Could you just let socialism exist in peace? How would socialism have worked in Venezuela if the U.S. never meddled in their affairs? If capitalism is so great, how come Venezuela must be forced by bayonet, by the imperialist, to become capitalist? If it's such a popular and great idea, shouldn't it just flourish on its own? So the war with Venezuela is bullshit, and you're bullshit too if you're for it, or if you don't speak out about it, because this is bullshit. This is bullshit for the entire year. This is another big-ass Vietnam War. We are starting on the wrong foot. We're not going into Venezuela for good intentions. We are not going in there to help Venezuela. We're going in there to let the capitalists, just take over and gut out their economy and take over, to steal their natural resources, to kick a socialist out of power. That's the reason why they're doing it. So there's no good reasons. We haven't been invaded by Venezuela. Venezuela has not attacked us. This is us being aggressive with them. And they've been, basically stellar in the terms of, who's the bully and who's not. They've, essentially have I don't know what they haven't I don't know. I don't know how much they've done in return, but I feel like it's clearly us being the investigators, clearly the United States being the instigator, being the oppressor, being the aggressor. It's clearly the United States. And again, they pose no threat to us. I don't have no quarrels with the Venezuelan people. I don't have no problems with the Venezuelan people never did shit to me. So why the hell are we fucking with their country? This is bullshit. This is the Monroe Doctrine gone astray. This is the Trump Doctrine, and the Trump Doctrine is just, he's the new Hitler. He owns the world, and he gets to invade any country that he wants to, especially if they're defenseless without nukes and allies. And so this is bullshit. This is bad. This is bad news. And I'm 100% opposed to it, but I just wanted to, sort of break it all down. That their democracy, we cannot say that our democracy is better than theirs. There's problems with the democracy. I'm not convinced that he's a dictator. He was elected twice by the people. They're going to say there's irregularities, but Jimmy Carter said that the elections in Venezuela was better than everyone else. Donald Trump wasn't elected by the majority of the people, so our democracy, with the Electoral College, it's not even a democracy. And then he issues all these executive orders, 120 executive orders so far. So that's a dictator who wasn't elected by the people, sitting there issuing all these executive orders. So when it comes to the democracy, when it comes to the, they said that, they're killing their own people. We are financing Juan Guaido's civil war, essentially. So the protesters that are in Venezuela are the violent, violent hoodlums running around the city. And so, how many people have they killed? It's not genocide. I think there's been a couple dozen because of these, protesters and government clashes. And I don't like that. I don't defend that. But I'm not about to say that we need to go into Venezuela because of our destabilization efforts. If we truly cared about those people, we wouldn't be paying those people to topple their own government. We would, try to work out friendly relationship where we treat the world as equals. And if we cared about the people, but, we're the empire, and so the empire is going to do is the empire. We're in 27 wars right now, 27 forever wars, and now we're going to get into another one. And like I said, it's clear and it's obvious to anybody who's paying attention. It is so clear and obvious to anybody who's paying attention. The oil companies all organized beforehand. Then you had the embargo and the, everything that we've done so far. The humanitarian aid was bullshit. It was Trojan horse. It was a poison pill. We've shut down their electric grid. And it's amazing the technology we're using to shut down their electric grid. Then we stole $1 billion worth of gold. We've stolen 3 oil refineries along the Gulf of Mexico. We've got this military blockade. We put sanctions not on Venezuela but on the American people too. So the American people can't engage in business with Venezuela. Hugo Chavez wants to give heating oil to the American people. So that's crazy, right? Our own government can't even make sure that we got enough heat, to survive our winters, and yet here Hugo Chavez, a foreign president, was sitting there donating all this heating oil to the American people. So is Maduro a dictator? I don't think it's clear to me. I think there's pros and cons to that argument. It seems like there's something going on. He admitted to about 1 million people, running out, but I've seen just as many reports that says that Venezuela's doing happy and good and healthy, and there's also, poor, there's poverty and crime too. So I've seen 2 essentially very stark contrast of what's going on in Venezuela. I think you could probably make the same case for America. There's some people in America doing very good, but there's also other people in America that's doing very, very crappy. So it depends on who you focus on, right? If you wanted to make an argument that American government doesn't treat their own citizens, I think you could probably clip up, some propaganda piece, but essentially, there are problems in America, so it wouldn't be that difficult to just focus on, only the worst, and then to paint up all America, as that. I'm enjoying this, okay? So let's see. You had the blockade, you had the embargoes, you had the sanctions, so we got this full-on embargo, we got this blockade. We're playing war games, so a lot of the countries have sided with us, but there's also a lot of notable countries, major countries, power hitters, Russia and China being the biggest ones who support Venezuela, but also, I think Bolivia and some of the Caribbean islands and some other nations too. So Venezuela's not without their support. They have their allies, so it's not the entire world. So a lot of, the world has gone along with the American government on this, but they're the empire, so, it's basically just, get in line. And if you trust what the U.S. government is saying, then you might think, oh, no, we need to save those poor Venezuelan people. Yeah, right, because we care so much. That's what we do. We go around spreading goodness and make sure they got universal health care, make sure that they have a war on poverty, make sure they have the right to their own body so they don't have a war on drugs, make sure there's no homeless people.